Nasie in gesprek met trots aan jou gebring deur Afgri, Monsanto, Nedbank, Senwes, Engen, Graan SA en John Deere.
Welkom by Nasie in gesprek hier van die NAMPO Oesdag. Ons het weer eens die gespreksreeks gevoer en vandag gaan ons kyk na Andile Khumalo van Power FM se gesprekke rondom suksesvolle transformasieprojekte waar die gemeenskap en kommersiële landbou uiteindelik 'n suksesvolle model geskep het. Oor na jou Andile.
Welcome to Nation in Conversation, coming to you all the way from NAMPO Harvest Day in Porterville. My name is Andile Khumalo. I will be your host, and I am the Managing Director of Power 98.7 and also the host of Power Business. Let me introduce you to our panel this morning that we are blessed to have with us. Mr. Rolf Meyer is on my left. He's the chairman of In Transformation Initiative, but also a gentleman who's been a big part of the transition into democracy here in South Africa. Sir, thank you so much for joining us. From the land bank next to him is Loyiso Ndlovu. She is the executive manager for commercial banking at the land bank. And right next to her is Chris. He's a chief executive at Afgri, Chris Venter. And Herbert Mabuza, who is a farmer, a producer, and a man who really epitomizes the experience of a black farmer getting into this industry. And right at the end, Charles Rousseau from the Rousseau family of companies, also a self-made farmer that is going to make some real good input into our conversation. I'd like to kick off by maybe talking a little bit about where we find ourselves as a country. I think that 23 years on, it is very clear that we are not where we would like to be, both from a social cohesion perspective, but perhaps most importantly, from the word economic empowerment. And that has led a lot of conversation happening around the country, words like white monopoly capital, words like radical economic transformation, which really are perhaps just a vindication of almost of what really exists. And that is, we started or built this country, at least the new South Africa, based on dialogue. And for whatever reason, straight after that dialogue and that negotiated settlement, everybody got on with their lives and life kind of moved on. And more and more, there were more and more disparities. One of those industries is indeed the agricultural sector. I was speaking to Rolf Meyer off air before we started, and I was telling them that when I was a young boy, it took me a long time to register that a boer was just a farmer. It was just another word in another language for a farmer. For me, a boer meant totally something different. And now I'm hearing about black boers. So if you're not following the conversation, I'm totally confused. And the reason for this conversation is to make sure that we go back to that dialogue, the very thing that saved this country from potential bloodbath. And I'm pretty sure Rolf was going to share that with us a little bit later. But let's start with you, Herbert. I want to start with you because the conversation is about talking about transformation initiatives. And I want to start from your own personal experience. I know you from the media industry. You were the managing editor of the Sunday Times, the Sowetan, and the Sunday World, I think. And you decided one day that you're interested in this farming thing for many years. It's time to drop your pen, which was your sword, as you typically say as journalists. And you decided to venture into farming. Take us through a little bit of your journey.
I think as I was working as a journalist, there's always this thing at the back of my mind that I wanted to do something else just in case I get tired of chasing after Rolf Meyer and other politicians. And somewhere along the line, I started researching and having a look at what's happening in the farming world. And I used to, when I was traveling, I would want to stay at like a working farm just to be able to see what's going on. And in 2007, I went to the farm that I'm in now. And I got in there and I said to the farmer, I like your place, I want to buy it, I want to be a farmer. And he took one look at me and he said, Kanje boer. And I said, no, I can't. And he said, no, I don't want to sell my farm to somebody who can't farm. So I looked at him and I said, so what are you going to do about it? Because I'm interested. And you want to sell your farm, I'm interested. So what are you going to do? So he said to me, okay, if you have time, you give yourself time and you give me time, you can come to this farm and you'll learn and I'll take you through the paces of what's going on. So I started visiting the farm. He took me around and he showed me everything. And I think that for me told me that I can get in. Because in your head, you always think that there's going to be this objection and it's not going to be easy. But when I then moved onto the farm in 2013, I realized that farming is humbling. You know, it's a space that will humble you when you get into it. It's a very cash incentive. It eats a lot of cash. So I come in with my money and eventually I look up, there's nothing in the bank. Because all the money is,
Yes.
and friends of mine will tell you when they say, where's your money? I said, yeah, it's under I put it underneath that soil. One day it will come out.
It'll come out, yeah.
And so that's basically the thing about it. And it's not easy to get money from institutions because one of the things that you get asked is, what experience do you have? And you say, no, but I've been mentored by this guy and all that, but that doesn't buy you anything. And I think that's the problem, where other projects will fail. If you don't have anything to start with, to put in, you'll go down.
So how were you able to raise the capital that you needed?
Well, I used some of my money and I teamed up with Senvest and they're an amazing company. They understand the space that they're in, and to work with them is like, they take you through. They mentor you and you go along, and you get quite a lot of support in doing what you're doing. I mean, I worked with a mentor Julius Ramushabi, who's left Senvest, unfortunately. But that guy, because I'm one of those guys who sort of like lie in bed and think about something, and then I'll send him a WhatsApp like 12 midnight, and then he'll respond quickly because I can't wait for this thing because it troubles me, and I'm not sure. I went and I looked, and there was a space that I wasn't happy with in terms of my maze and stuff like that. And so I would ask him the question and he will respond. So I think that when you have somebody like that, you plug into experience and you plugged into somebody who's passionate, who's got interest, who wants to help.
All right, let's pause there with you, Herbert. Thanks for that. Let me come to you, Rolf. Herbert mentioned something about the initial response that the gentleman that he met gave him and how he kind of felt. And he made a comment that I thought, oh my goodness, here we go again. We talk about these partnerships, and very soon we're going to talk about the initiatives that are already happening in the industry. But I want to go back, especially with your experience of negotiating or being part of the negotiated settlement here in this country. In your own view, how much work have we done or still have to do in just making sure that certainly the different races, first of all, see themselves as equals? That the black farmer doesn't see themselves as an inferior, or the white farmer see themselves as a superior, so that this partnership actually happens. Because if you don't deal with that reconstruction, it's going to be very difficult, and it'll come through in what you hope to be a partnership from henceforth.
I think if we look back at our experience during those days that you're referring to, the period of the negotiations, first of all, you must remember, it took us 6 years. It was not something that was like that. From the day that Madiba walked out of prison till we had the final constitution, it was in fact 7 years, 1990 to 1997. And, you know, we started off with the same misgivings with each other. I mean, I'm quite sure when most of the guys on the other side of the table, meaning on the ANC and the Black Party side, entered the room, starting talking to us, they were looking at us as the boere.
And that means not the farmer.
That's not the farmer in this case. So there was a lot of mistrust when we started. But fortunately, through the process of negotiations and particularly through the process of dialogue, we started to learn each other. And the social cohesion that developed through that was massive. That is what led to a peaceful settlement in South Africa. I think, you know, in recent times, I've often asked myself, what should we have done differently with regard to the ongoing need for transformation, which is still there. I mean, the constitutional or political change, transition, happened in a swift moment. It was like on the 27th of April, 1994, the new constitution or the interim constitution came into operation. But the process of economic and social transformation is ongoing. It's, like you said, 23 years later, and we are far from completion. So what should we have done differently? What is the absent factor? And I think what we should have done at that time was to continue with a process of dialogue on the real economic transformation of the country, sector by sector. Some of it happened within the broader business environment through black economic empowerment. In the beginning, there were many mistakes made. It started with fronting and all sorts of nonsense. I think over a period of time, it started to develop within the business environment, different industries, into, you know, a working relationship, let's put it that way, with success. But in others, like in agriculture, you know, there's a lot that's not happened yet. And I think that what we need now is a real dialogue between the different role players, between the different components of the industry, to actually come to that success. I mean, land reform is part of it. It's not the total picture. What is more important is, first of all, to promote agriculture as an industry in South Africa. Because most South Africans, you know, the people in the cities, don't think of agriculture as really something of importance for the country. They forget that it's a very important contributor to the GDP of the country. Similarly, like Herbert and others were saying, we have to look at food security. We have to look at job creation. All important components and contributors from the side of agriculture. And so I think we are now in a phase where we can say we are at the starting point of opening up a dialogue, of serious content that can actually materialize what we should have done already by now.
Thank you so much for those comments, Roof. Let me go to Charles. Charles, you told me a story that I find interesting because, again, just like I thought every person who was called a boer meant something else other than a farmer, I also thought that every Afrikaner that is indeed a farmer has inherited these big fat farms from 100 years on. Your family story is not quite like that. It's quite different. Just take us through that and also reflect for me, how do you then get the commercial farmers to be part of the solution, to see it in their interest, to be part of this inclusive growth story that we're talking about and really commit to it?
Andile, our story started way back. You know, it's the third generation that's part of exposed to agriculture, that's involved in agriculture. But we didn't inherit that we're having today. So we had to, but we had the background. What Herbert doesn't have. So we had the background. We could go. We had access to mentorship to people, big farmers sitting in this audience today. Some of them, and they've actually showed us a way and gave us direction. And then we went back, and we know we had a nice idea of what and a feeling of what agriculture is like. What's going on in agriculture. Part of his visits to his mentor, so-called mentor, is to understand what's going on in agriculture. There's no programs, there's no models, there's nothing that we roll out for the youth, for the young people. Anyone that wants to get into agriculture, where do they start? Go and Google it. Go and Google transformation in South Africa. You'll only find a definition of a transformation. By the way, that definition means radical transformation or radical change. So radical transformation means radical
change. Yeah.
Okay. The point is, we need to have programs, models that we can set out. Give people exposure to how does the industry work. What's the role of agribusinesses, the farmers' cooperatives, teach them management skills, farm skills, bookkeeping. How does the supply chain works. So that's all things that you need to know, but you can't pick it up. So you have to go through the process, and that it's always a sense of insecurity. You don't know where you are. So that's what happened to us. But fortunately, we had access to those people. So and then you start. It's a entrepreneurial environment, and then you need to start to say, okay, listen, this is what I can do. This is how it works. My first line I got from the Land Bank. Thanks for that, and that helped me. So exactly the same as Herbert. And I think that's the starting point is totally a different reference. It's so difficult for somebody that's not in this family of agriculture to enter it. It's actually, you have to raise your hat for those people.
All right, let me actually move on to Chris. On that note, Chief Executive at AFGRI, you've got your own initiatives that are happening, Chris. I know about Harvest Time Investments. I don't know about some of the work that's done at AFGRI. Maybe as you reflect on what we're talking about and some of the comments from Charles, lots of things being done by lots of people, but maybe not as cohesive as it ought to be.
That's certainly the case. I think what Charles has mentioned, just to touch on that point, is we engage a lot with commercial farmers on transformation. And I must say, I haven't come across one farmer that's not willing to help or not willing to assist or not willing to transfer knowledge. And that is the goodwill that we need to take forward. We need to embrace that goodwill on both sides. From an AFGRI point of view, in terms of looking at transformation, we started with initially looking at individual development, small-scale farmer development, which has grown over periods. We also learned a lot of lessons in the sense of saying, how do we embrace that? How do we make more commercial farmers? Because a lot of good, successful farmers today also started off, as Charles referred to, fairly small. So if we can start on embracing those small-scale farmers who has the passion and the heart to learn, maybe in 20, 50 years from now, you can have those commercial farms. And I think that's our approach, is to say, from a food security point of view, how do we look after our country when we're 80, 90 million people and we still need to produce our own food and not import food? And that is where your farming community, the commercial farmer, the small-scale farmer, land bank, government, we all need to take hands and say, how do we embrace that? So yes, we start with small-scale farmers. We start with embracing those small guys. A lot of help from commercial farmers. We had examples where a small-scale guy couldn't harvest his soybeans. We find support from the neighboring farmer, commercial farmer. So all of those stories needs to be coordinated somehow. I think we're all busy as agricultural companies, as farmers in their own right. Government is doing a lot of work, land banks doing a lot of. So maybe somehow tell those stories and embrace the good that was done. We also moved on a little bit in the sense of Harvest Time, where we said that to touch one small-scale farmer is good and well, but what if you can touch a community and make that community sustainable? So we moved on to a program where we take the farmers in one community to try and engage with them and trying to support them as well, so that you create a sustainable community within that region instead of the young guys moving away from that region.
Let's move on to you, Loyiso. Land Bank, you've heard the comments about the money, certainly from Mr. Mabuza there. Yeah, he needs some bucks. You've had your successes. We've seen some of that earlier on today. Where are you in terms of making those programs more and more sophisticated to match the demand? And maybe let me also pose the same question to you, creating those fewer businesses that can have a bigger impact, just as an example of, hey, here is a Mabuza, here is a Khumalo. We've created an actual industrialist in this space.
And I think that the point you make in the beginning about trust is a critical part of that conversation. Because actually, in executing any type of project or program, it is premised upon trust. So your execution, your highs and lows of execution, strengthen a trust relationship such that you speed up on what's required. So we see our role, and I think Chris touched on it really well, that we know that there is land, we know that you need finance, we know that you need markets, and you need agronomy. There's a technical capability that is required in farming that doesn't come, it doesn't develop. You need a technical capability to infuse it to strengthen the delivery. And what we found is that to the extent that you can look at that as a full value chain allows you to be able to intermediate, to give your money and trust that it will return. We are, after all, a bank. And the responsibility we have as an institution is to make sure that when we give money, that money works across the value chain, that it impacts everybody, not just a couple of people.
Right.
Strategically, we've also decided, as Charles was referring to, that actually growth comes across a pyramid. So you grow an economy by increasing the number of commercial farmers. So you make a specific effort to increase the number of people that work at an industrialist scale. You also make an effort to move those that are smallholder farmers towards commercialization, towards wanting to farm at commercial scale. And by moving everybody up a value chain, you begin to start dispersing the benefits across. You also saw some of the examples that you have there, that government, I think, has been very specific in using agriculture as a lever for particularly employment opportunities. That the nature of the sector is such that it is the one place where when you talk about how to employ at scale, you can do it within the sector. How to industrialize and find opportunities for technology, to sit on the cusp of using technology for yield, you can do that as well. And when you look at the success of South African commercial farmers, and they will tell you, they're amongst the best in the world. I mean, globally, the yields that they have are comparative to anybody in Europe and in US. And Charles will also say to you that in the legislative changes that happened within the sector, they moved from being a kind of a very regulated, subsidized industry to a free market system where they had to compete globally. And actually, even though the number of participating farmers has reduced, actually, yields have increased. So what it tells you is that they've increased their ability to deliver food security, and they've managed to be able to beneficiate that. And the focus now is to make sure that everybody moves up, that it doesn't just start at the top level, at commercialization, that you begin to start in making sure that one person with their 1 acre can do something effective with that land such that you begin to start moving up the value chain.
Maybe let's wrap by just getting some final comments from all of you guys, and I want you to focus on solutions, what needs to happen. Charles, I can almost predict what you're going to say, but let me let you have your spiel. What do we need to do and do quickly?
Well, I think the first point is we need to look at transformation in agriculture in a totally different way. It's not a target that needs to be reached, but it's an attitude. I think if we embrace that, that's going to take us to just a new possibilities. So what I'd like to see is that all the efforts being dealt with collectively, and really create the opportunity for anyone to know, to find a way, like a roadmap in agriculture. If you want to do this, you go to this guy, there's a finance, there's your mentor in that region. You can go to this co-op for information, or for an extension officer, there's a land bank. Make it easy for the guys, make a roadmap. Bring it back, bring it down to not this level of talk just, but to practical experience to people.
Roof, closing comments?
Well, we mentioned the homework that's been done. So the news is that we are in fact going to launch something of a coordinating point that can operate in such a way that it can make a contribution to what Charles and Herbert were saying. Even if it's small scale at the beginning, but from there it can hopefully escalate. It can put into motion the big requirement for fulfilling the big requirement. So we hope that within a month or so from now, we can actually let the world know what we are planning to do as far as this is.
Good.
To make a start, to put all this information together that we have now collected, and to inspire others to follow suit, to carry it through, and to make this something that can be of great success, not only for the industry, but every role player involved.
Great stuff. Thank you so much for that. Ruth, thank you to all the panelists. Thank you for your time. Thank you for making the contribution. Dare I say that time is not on our side. I do think that there is an energy in the country that could rob us, or we can make use of it and move rather quickly, but it could rob all of our efforts if we do nothing. And I do think that this is the one industry that's probably at the right time for this kind of stuff. Everybody's kind of ready and knows the benefits and sees it. I think the opportunity is definitely there. But for now, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us. Remember, of course, to follow us on Twitter and visit the website nationinconversation.co.za. From us here at NAMPO, it's goodbye.
Nasie in gesprek met trots aan jou gebring deur Afgri, Monsanto, Nedbank, Senwes, Engen, Graan SA en John Deere.